Mixed reviews.
Mixed reviews. Yeah,
Mixed reviews.
we're back, baby.
We are back.
Woo woo.
What did we watch this time, Jax?
We watched Parasite. If you didn't read the title, also, sorry, it throws me off having a camera there.
I keep looking at it.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Welcome to the video version of the podcast.
Video.
We've attempted the first two, but we didn't do it. It was weird. Those were like weird trial ones, so I think we've kind of got it figured out now.
Hopefully.
We've realized how bad we are at podcasts, so I think we've improved a little bit, or know what to improve.
Yeah. Now that we've had to edit a podcast, it definitely shows that we could change some things.
So we'll see how we do with the video, but yeah, here we watch Parasite, 2019, directed by Bong Joon-Ho. Very good movie. I love it so much. We watched this movie for the first time during Oscar season, and 2019.
We did.
And I know I loved it the first time I watched it. I remember the only thing I had with it was that I'm very, well, it's just a personal thing, but I didn't take away from the movie. One thing normally about movies with subtitles is I'm a very slow reader, so I have a hard time following along. But this movie, I actually like. We watched it last night again, and every time I watch it, it's the easiest film to watch with subtitles. It wasn't hard for me at all. I wasn't trying to keep up. But yeah, that movie is very visual, and I absolutely love that. No matter what language it is, you can see that movie and take away all the visual storytelling they used and how great they really did. Like, think of like Mr. Bean, how you can enjoy that anywhere, and because he doesn't say anything. This is a movie that I think kind of holds that up.
Yeah, I agree. Now let's get into the visual storytelling you love so much about it.
Right.
Tell us a bit of why visual storytelling is important. And what this movie does with it that makes it so good.
Well, for example, I was pointing it out when we were watching it, is the quite visual divided frames. He uses a lot of lines and a lot of he uses a lot of lines to to show
lines are good
in his frame to like divide characters or to lead you to look to something. But the divided lines between the two, they use the line a lot. They talk a lot about crossing the line, and that's a thing. That's something that the Park family talks a lot about, especially Mr. Park, is the crossing the line, and they actually show it quite visually in the film. It's quite subtle sometimes. Like I definitely first time watching it didn't see it, but sitting looking for stuff to talk about, I definitely noticed it. But
can you give an example of that?
Yeah, one of the first times you see it in the movie is when Kiwoo goes to interview for the job. He sees the housekeeper goes outside to Mrs. Park, and she goes to wake her up, and there's the line from the glass.
Oh, like the window pane?
The window pane. Right. You see the line from it, and the two are divided from that line outside, and she reaches over it to clap and wake her up.
Oh, really?
And I thought that was a really great example of someone crossing the line with their actions, and they showed it visually. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. And they play in that whole movie, that whole crossing the line thing, right? With Mr. Kim, the dad from the Kim family, on how he almost crosses the line over and over and over again. And
especially with his smell.
Yeah. So the smell crosses the line. It's actually said in the film by Mr. Park, right? Just when you think he's about to cross the line, he doesn't. I love that you can see that Mr. Kim is like walking that line too in the visual storytelling. Like when they're in the car the first time, I think it's when he's testing him with the coffee mug, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And Mr. Kim asks Mr. Park about his wife, and then they have their little chat, and then he's like, "Oh, but you love her, right?" And you can see that the kind of like upsets Mr. Park a little bit, but then he pulls it back, right? So that's within the acting, the visual storytelling of what you see in the characters' faces, not just the dialogue that they're having. You can see that what's being said or what's happening in the film is affecting these people without the need to explain it, which is another little aspect of visual storytelling that I find fascinating is the performance of an actor over just cinematography, which is phenomenal with you mean which you were saying about the window pane. I love that this film was able to express your character emotions through their faces rather than, oh, he said this about me and I don't like it. You know, it's all visual. It's all you're taking it in with your eyes rather than with your ears, and that's pristine filmmaking if you ask me.
And there's lots of times in the film as well that they tell you stuff about the characters through visuals. So like in the beginning, especially with the Kim family, they introduce to you their poor even just with the opening shot. But throughout that whole opening sequence, there's so many little things, and even in the acting as well, in the dialogue that is there. But so many just visual things, looking at their house, looking at the things they're doing and how they hold themselves, their outfits, but just so many visual things there that show you that they're poor, and it's all there in the story, and in that just I love how they set that up. There's so many things like that in this movie. Another like there's other examples too, like I love the little montage after they've left for the camping trip. You see the Kim family just there so comfortable, and that the whole little montage is just all visuals. It's just of them around the house doing all these things. She's in the bathtub, they're outside playing with their stuff. It's just things like that where it's just all these visuals that like tell the story without having to have dialogue. And I just think there's so many examples I could go on and on in this film that tell a story without having, even if it is voiceover underneath, you get it all through your eyes, and you don't have to be reading the subtitles. You can just look at the screen and you know what's going on. And that I think is it's tough to do at times. I think it's filming. I've had a very hard time doing that myself with films, but I think it's when it's done well, it's good filmmaking, and it's very apparent when you see it.
I agree. Now, we always go on and on and on about whatever film we're talking about. Batman, we spend most of the time talking about what we didn't love about it and issues we found with it, and I feel like this movie is going to be quite the opposite. It's so well done. The storytelling is, in our opinion, very very well done. It's just solid, to say the least. So, as my job on the podcast to find things that I didn't like about it, or that from a filmmaking standpoint were a bit lackluster or subpar, it was very difficult to find those moments in this film. So, just as a heads up to our audience, in this one, a bit different from the last two we've done, we're going to look at negative reviews made by other people on the internet kind of as source for what this film could have done better, and we can talk about what we think as someone who may have a bit more um, background in story writing and filmmaking, uh,
It,
our opinions on them.
it was fun to kind of go on Letterbox and IMDb and look at these really just poorly written and dumb uh low reviews, but I think we found quite a few that like actually had something to say. Lots of them just were like, "Oh, it's bad."
Tell me a bit more about what you noticed in this film that you would say would be excellent filmmaking. Could you maybe let's go category. Let's try writing. What do you have in the writing category?
Lots of things in the writing that like stood out to me and I loved were lots of foreshadowing in the movie. So, um, things like even just like in the beginning, they set up kind of that these people are basically con artists. They're swindling as much as they can. They're trying to cut corners. Even just in like that first scene, they're using someone else's Wi-Fi. They are, well, I guess it's technically probably like the second or third scene, but they're finding the cheapest, easiest way to fold these boxes, least amount of time. They pull up some video, and then when they're giving them away, they're like, it's done wrong. They even swindle the girl into still giving them the money for it, and just like they set up these characters to be con artists, like not subtly, but they give it to you right away without you realizing how important it's going to become. And then once they're given the opportunity to get this job, then it's like, oh, I see. And I think that was a really good setup to this story, was showing you this family. You get to see them as con artists, sort of, and then now it's their big, uh,
Yeah, they've completely changed their lives, right? I always thought it was interesting watching what went from just a tiny. I always thought it was interesting just seeing what went from just an innocent little like tutoring gig.
right.
It's like, hey, you don't need to know too much stuff. Why not just go tutor this high school girl? And then all of a sudden it turns into, the sister getting in on it. And then all of a sudden she gets the dad in on it. And then the dad gets the mom. And then all of a sudden, like, people are dying. It's kind of interesting how, from a story standpoint,
It's if you try
like,
to pitch this script to someone, it's like, what? How, how are you gonna sell that to someone? But it's done really seamlessly.
it's done so well by balancing, I think, the economic state of whatever world this is in.
Mm,
I would say it's our world, right? Like
yeah,
typical uh, South Korea, I'd say.
and not that I've ever been or know the culture very well, but that's gonna be my assumption from
But
this movie.
within this world, I think it does a great job at expressing these people as, it. I wouldn't necessarily agree. It's like saying poor people are evil and conniving, and rich people are innocent and dumb and like susceptible to being conned. I think
Well,
it's
I'd say even the rich people were bad in their own way in that movie,
yeah,
but not saying that that's every person.
no, but I think it does. This plays into some of the reviews we read more so is a lot of people kept saying that it's unrealistic. It paints a bad image on people who are in a rough time in their lives. So I think in an essence it's pretty interesting.
I think it did a good well of showing the story of these specific people. They might not be everyone else, but just the people who are so poor that they're willing to do anything to get some money, to the point where they're forging documents and tricking, manipulating people to do it. And then on the other side, this rich family that cares so little about anyone but themselves that they can't see that they're being tricked by multiple parties, not just the Kim family, by the people who are already there. And it is two parasites at each other that make this I think what would be a believable story. And I don't have any qualms with the believability of it, because it the storytelling sold. I was never taken out by the storytelling.
Onto the topic of writing, I did have an issue with believing the Kim family had all these skills
Yeah.
that managed to keep them in the house so for so long. More so, maybe Ki Woo being good at English is good enough to keep him as a tutor, right? But the the daughter tutoring the young son, I can't remember his name unfortunately, tutoring him as an art teacher, but then spinning it off into like, I'm an art psychologist, also a bit believable. But Mr. Kim having 20 plus years of driving experience and knowing how to drive a vehicle so well that he physically is able to pass like the coffee test is like, okay, maybe. But then the mom coming in as the housekeeper, that to me was like, it's like, okay, there's no way she would hold a job for longer than a week as this housekeeper, because you look back at their house that they lived in and she was always cleaning it. I don't know if you caught that. Pretty much every time she was in that house and not eating together as like a whole family, she was
She's cleaning.
scrubbing, she was cleaning, but it never got any cleaner,
Right.
you know. That might be symbolism for how no matter how hard they try to clean, they're always going to be poor, they're always going to be disgusting.
Right. Which was a motif throughout the film, anyways.
Yeah, exactly. But if that's kind of the state of this woman's cleaning, I find it hard to believe she would have been kept on as long as she did.
Which also, I think, man, I should have written down names and figured them out because I can't remember anyone's name. The daughter of the Kim family. It's gonna bug me that I don't know the
I
names.
think it was Ki Young. Ki Jung.
He's young.
I think so.
It's worth looking up, but we're already in the topic. Um, she was making up all the art stuff, and maybe yeah, she probably could have sat with him, but um, well, this is also a good little foreshadowing thing. Sorry to like take
No,
your
go
point and
ahead.
probably move on to something else, but I thought it was pretty interesting. Something I didn't catch the first time I watched is she points out that what she's coming up with all this on the spot, she admits to later, is that she calls out that this one symbol maybe means he has like trauma in his past, which I never caught, but she's like totally referring to the like the ghost incident, I guess, when the guy comes up from the basement, which probably one of my favorite shots in the movie, let me say. He's
Yeah,
so dope.
I agree. I think genuinely that whole sequence where she's expressing to Mrs. Park this kid's artwork, and she's got to be reaching, right? Like, oh, the bottom right is the schizophrenia corner where odd shapes manifest if the child's ever had any past trauma or anything like that, right? And then just kind of without any base, just threw off, has anything happened to him in the first grade, sets off the entire ghost thing, and really,
You could tell something's changed with Miss Park as soon. Like, I mean, they flipped the axis and the whole thing, which was a really cool visual way to show it. Whoa.
what other kind of standout categories did you notice this film had that you wanted to note?
I wouldn't know if this, maybe it was something that's sort of related to writing, but to me, this is more of just a, um, I don't even know where it would fit, but it's when it dealing with like symbolism in films and um film kind of thing is a motif. If you don't know did we talk about this? I can't remember if we ended up talking about this in the first
We
episode.
may have mentioned motifs, but quickly explain it.
A motif is basically something like repeated in a film, a symbol repeated in a film that gives it more meaning and kind of um brings it towards like the overall theme of the movie. So it's just something like some subtle symbol that's brought throughout the movie that kind of gives that symbol meaning to the point where it stands out and it's noticeable to the audience and it means more than just like a coincidence or a symbol or an item. An example of that in this film, there's two really good ones that really stuck out to me, and I noticed it yesterday watching it, and I really want to talk about it. So it may kind of still be under writing because this was something that came out in the script,
Okay, yeah.
but the first being the rock that it's known as in my notes. It's known as a viewing stone. It's something that like ancient scholars would have had and passed down because it's like a naturally formed rock that's like looks really beautiful that they would have kept. And Ming is it Min or Ming?
Min.
Min?
Yeah.
Min says it when he comes and hands it to him. Is like, these are known to bring wealth unto the families that possess them. And that's as soon as you see that Kiwoo is like instantly clicked, because his whole thing in the film is his desire for wealth, right? And for prosperity. You even see it in his fantasy at the end there. When he's dreaming of buying the house, the whole film, he just wants wealth. He wants to be these people. He doesn't know if he'll fit in. But this rock is the visual manifestation of that on the screen. As soon as he gets it to pretty much when he's killed by it at the end, in the who knows if it's a fantasy or if it ends up happening, but in his dream as he's writing that letter, you see him finally give it up when he has that wealth. But
Well, he says, I think is it when they're in the gymnasium after their house floods, he's clinging on to the rock.
yeah,
But he says something interesting. He says, it's like it's stuck to me or something along those lines, right? And that's kind of interesting that this rock.
It was one of their lowest moments, and he's really clinging on to it there.
Right. And he's clinging on to it, but he also says it clings onto him. And as you mentioned, it's a physical representation. It's a motif of his desire for wealth, his desire for success, his desire to be an upper class. Yet it sticks to him. It's a rock. It's heavy. He can barely lift it, right? It's shown a couple of times he can't hold this thing well. He can't move with it very well.
Oh yeah, he doesn't fit in its.
And at the end of the film, it kills him. Potentially, it crushes his head, right? So that's a very interesting and a very well done usage of the motif of this symbol as a filmmaking tool to show that yes, this thing exists. This thing, in one term, to some people represents wealth and represents good tidings, but for him, it's physically weighed him down. It's physically kept him from mobile wise. He can't move with it, and at the end of it, it crushes him. So his own desire for his own wealth and his own desire for wanting to be successful kills him.
Well, it's at the end too. Because what it turns into at that point, if I will say, I recommend watching the movie again and like looking for it, because it's really cool once you realize it. But at that moment at the end, when he has the rock at their house and he goes to go kill the people living in the basement. He's using that to go. He's getting greedy and he's going to kill them so that they don't expose their foolproof plan. And that's when it backfires on him and he ends up getting killed by it. Right. Because he's trying to do something out of his power to keep these people silent, and it's too much for him, and then it gets flipped on him.
Yeah. Any other symbols and motifs you
right? Yeah. So the second one is quite obvious, is the smell, especially with K-Tech, because it definitely affects him the most, and you can see it affect him the most. But Mr. Park always comments on that smell crossing the line, the radishy, wet, damp cloth, subway smell, however he describes it. But that comes, it starts when the kid first smells the smell. It's like, you smell the same. And then he mentions it in the car. And then he mentions it when they're hiding on the table, and he just berates him. And he has no idea he is. But Mr. Kim is under the table just getting berated by him, making fun of his smell. And you might be like, but Jackson, what does this have to do with anything? It's because it's almost like they say it when they're when do they say it? There's some line when they're alone, like at their house or something, where they said it basically, they mention it being they're poor, they're not going to get rid of this. No, she says it's just the smell of this house, we're never going to get rid of it. As long as they're poor, they're going to smell like this, and it kind of represents their inability, especially Kintek's, they're all stuck to this wealth, to the poverty, that they can't escape it, and they no matter how much you scrub or clean. It is what I guess not. I was gonna say visually. It's not visually. It's what how would you or not orally, nosily? Is there a word for it? It's
Yeah, I would
it's a
say
representation of
of their
their
poverty.
poverty is their stench. It's what sets them aside from everyone else is that stench. And um him constantly being reminded good as good as everything is going, he's always reminded of that smell. And especially when he's getting like berated in that scene at night when they're hiding on the table. Um, but at the end there, when Ki Jung is dead, she's bleeding out, and they've just stabbed the guy that was hiding in the basement. He lifts up the body. You get the car keys, and you see a slow mo shot of him plug his nose, like ah, and that's the point for him where it's finally just like he can't escape this smell, and he finally breaks. Um, and that's when he goes after him and kills him. It's just fine. It's like his breaking point. It's his one like insecurity, his one tie to poverty that he can't do anything about really. I think it's a really cool way to show that not like with Kiwoo and The Rock, it's they're never gonna be able to get it, and it's that breaking point that finally takes him to. We're always gonna be poor. We don't belong here because their smell. I just I think that both things really climax the movie for especially those two characters, with him being Kiwoo being killed and Ki-Tek killing and then hiding. It's a great way to kind of wrap the climax.
What did you think of the end?
Um, I will say I did enjoy definitely parts of it. Um I liked how it kind of summed up and brought back stuff. Like for example, like the Morse code of how, especially for Kitek's arc, sort of now he's stuck in the basement. He's low of the low after seeing the guy that was out down there. He's like, it is disgusting. How could you do this? And now he's the guy leaving Morse code messages. He's the guy sleeping in the cot eating gross, well, using cat food, right? Like he's just eating gross, scrounging for stuff in the late of the night. He's finally hit such rock bottom that now he's at that level of the guy squatting in the basement. And I just liked, I guess, his little fantasy of wanting to achieve that wealth one more time and get the house and get all that. And then you brought back to it's the same shot as the opening shot. And you're brought back to reality, and he's finished writing a letter. And I thought that was really, really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really into that beginning and end shot kind of topic that's really big with filmmakers and everything. But wouldn't be mixed reviews if I didn't express why I didn't like the ending.
Right. Why is that, Tom?
So big reason I didn't like, I think I would say the climax, like with the slaughter fest at the birthday party.
There to the end, sort of?
The end is okay. Like I like how it ended. A little bit of a little bit of you don't know how it's ending.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a little bit of interesting hope there, but you don't know. I like how it was a little bit of you don't know how it ends
Right.
specifically, but everything leading up to the ending is good. Like finding out that Mr. Kim is in the basement. That was cool. I did like that. I just didn't like how he broke. I
Right.
know you mentioned there's a huge thing with the smell thing, and that has just been clobbering him through the whole movie is the fact that he smells like poor person. It's never stated, but it's meant to suggest that he smells like a poor person and he doesn't fit in, and it's being noticed, and it's kind of stressing him out, and he's just getting hit over and over again, and it breaks him enough to kill Mr. Park. to me is a reach. It is a very theatrical movie.
Can I maybe add why I think
Sure.
maybe
Yeah.
something else that would go to it, if that's fine, or do you want to finish your
No,
ending?
I mean it's basically I just didn't believe that it would lead to him dramatically killing Mr. Park.
Right. I think especially from the beginning of the climax when they're behind the bushes and he's like that crossed the line. It's just I think that was very the whole thing was pretty intense for him, and then especially when he um Ki Jung is dead and he's more worried about Mr. Park is more worried about his son that's fainted, that he's just completely dismissed this whole family, this whole Kim family, and is more worried about being disgusted by the smell and his kid that he doesn't care that this their tutor just got stabbed and they're all running to go help and all this stuff. I just think that may be added towards it, but I definitely can see a little bit of that being a very drastic change. Dramatic, I guess, is probably a better word.
Yeah. And I can see that for sure within the sphere of the world, right? Like you can tell that the whole film's been over dramatic in my opinion. With like the high opera music that goes on with the slow-mo montages when they're basically sabotaging the original housekeeper with the peaches. That whole sequence is all very like high and dramatic and slow. It fits within the world. His jump from just being really annoyed and kind of hurt to murderous intent, right? So in the aspect of the whole movie, it could be believable, but if you're someone who's not super in tune to the ongoings of this cinematic world that the directors built, you might look at that and be like, "Oh, well, I would never do that." Yeah, a lot of viewers I find,
You're relating to yourself,
yeah, a
right?
lot
Yeah.
of viewers do that when they watch a movie. They're like, "What would I do in that situation?" I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. And at the very end, you get to that one giant climax moment where a lot of viewers, in my opinion, might just look at it and say, "Oh, well, that's weird." It goes against the tone of the film, which up until that point is very suspenseful and very more so dark, but that's a very bright, weird, and violent scene versus a rather,
It's more violent than like suspenseful.
yeah, exactly. That's a very good way of putting it. Which in hindsight, you look at it, the film's name is Parasite. Parasites are they latch onto you, and most of the time you don't understand a parasite is even there until too much damage has been done to reverse it. Which I guess saying that kind of defeats my purpose, but devil's advocate, I think it's important to consider that when making a movie. When you're making a movie, consider how your audience will feel, even if it goes against what you think the movie needs.
There's
So
there's definitely times I've been people like, oh well, that doesn't make sense, and I keep hearing. I'm like, yeah, but it makes sense to me. Right? I always have to like stand back and go, okay, wait, I'm maybe this isn't the best idea. Maybe yes, it doesn't make sense and it's gonna throw people off.
yeah, what I notice a lot is we've both been through film school, we've both been through education on how movies work and how to make movies and what goes wrong on movie sets, right? So we have that kind of little key to the little viewing window in most films. So we see things and go, "Oh, that makes complete sense," after we've spent 3 years in a textbook learning about why it makes sense, right? But then I'll go home and watch a film with my mom, and I'll be like, "This is a great movie. You're gonna love it. It's super cool." And then my mom will sit there and hate it
Yeah.
because it's not obvious, it's not clear.
I get the reverse as well, where my parents are like, "Oh, look at this really good movie." I'm like, "But this is terribly made." But they look way past that. We're not looking about how something's made or how it is. They're looking at how can I relate to this.
Exactly. And that's a kind of what I'm trying to do when I watch these movies is turn off that part of my brain when I'm looking at things like that to clue in. And another while I'm going on here, another thing that took me out of it. Parasite has a lot of barefoot on tile and barefoot on concrete that was just so loud in comparison to what it would actually be in the real world. And that to me is a mistake as myself, kind of an amateur filmmaker, but still filmmaker. Uh, I would have all those footsteps like a little bit more quiet so you can still hear them, but so they're not just like it's distracting. My famous tagline here, it takes me out of it.
Takes you out of it. Wow.
Cuz then I'm more focused on, oh wow, his feet are really loud on those tiles versus oh, he's running from this crazy dude from the basement. You know what I mean? As a filmmaker, you want to give your audience what you want them to see. Now, if the director wanted me to hear the footsteps above everything else going on, then he succeeded. But for me, I hated hearing those footsteps when there is a lot going on because I was like, okay, that's too much footstep,
It's
right?
too loud.
And then for consistency's sake, in scenes where the Kim family needed to be quiet, the footsteps were very quiet, despite the movement not really changing, right? Like their weights don't change, the atmospheres don't change, but the footsteps changed sound. Versus 3 days ago, they were doing the same kind of movement across the floor, but the footsteps were like dinosaur loud. It's a big thing, right? That if you notice those things, it's usually an issue. Especially for me, because that was kind of all I did in my last year of college was footsteps and ambience. It was like my whole
So
year.
you especially hear it all the time too.
Definitely. That's probably the one thing I pick up the most now out of everything is like
The little
clothes
sound.
rustling
The
or
ASMR. It's if I will say one time when I was working on mixing a film and we soloed, just listen to the Foley sounds by themselves, so we didn't hear anything else. It was almost like listening to ASMR, and you just hear the
yeah.
not the lip smacking, but the clothes rustling.
I actually had to do lip smacking once. I worked on this one project in my post-production year.
Mm.
I was the sound effects lead on it. That's a bit of a step away from Foley, but kind of a cool little anecdote. I was sound effects, and there's a character who's kind of like a monster, weird like fingernails and stuff. Our note from the director was he can't sound human. He needs to sound like a monster, even though he was kind of like looked a little goofy, right? So I'm like, okay. Sat down with my team. I'm like, okay, how can we make this guy scary when all he's doing is like on like a piece of cardboard or whatever? So we added like a lot of mouth sounds. I think one guy on my team went into the mic and was just like, and just kind of dubbed it and then put a whole bunch of different things on it to make it sound like a monster screeching. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. But we had to do mouth sounds
Yeah,
for
that
like a
sounds
little
like fun.
Foley project. Anyway, I digress. Sorry about that.
Would we want to get into some of those reviews now?
I think we should.
Yeah.
How much good stuff do you have to say still?
I think I've gotten through pretty much at least the big stuff. I could go. We all know I could go on for hours talking about things I love about movies, but I think for the sake of big key points I want to hit today, I got everything I wanted to say.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's about time then to dig into our bad
Woo
reviews.
woo. Bad reviews.
Bad reviews. This is a 4-star review on what was this again?
Parasite? No, this is Letterboxd.
Letterboxd. It's a 4-star review on Letterboxd.
I will say it was kind of fun to go through and read these reviews because lots of them were so dumb.
This looks like a good film or good review.
Okay.
So let's get into it. Bong Joon-Ho always manages to create films that somehow define genres and exist in a realm of their own. Yeah, I think we kind of talked about that a little bit. Parasite is no exception. It's the type of film that intrigues throughout its entire running time, as there is an unmistakable feel of it leading up to something. What that something is remains in the dark for a long time, not because of a cheap writing trick, but because of Bong Joon-Ho's aforementioned talent for creating things that refuse to be niched. As long as it's not really clear what you're watching, everything remains open, making it an absolute joy to watch. Um, there's a really huge amount to there really is a huge amount to enjoy in this unique film, but it's not without its faults. To me, it felt like Bong Joon-ho overreached his grasp somewhat. With a build-up as great as this, the payoff needs to be equally impressive, and while it certainly packs a punch, it lacked the subtlety of the previous acts and somehow felt telegraphed too much. In and of itself, it is a well-crafted final act, but linked to what became before it, it just missed the mark for me.
It's almost what you were saying earlier. It's just how they kind of built up to something, and
Yeah, that definitely goes into the whole what I was saying about you have this entire film that's all nuanced and suspicious and dark and sneaky and kind of like conniving, and then the final act just brings you into violence. I definitely agree with this as saying the film as a whole, and the film is not lesser because of how it ended, but it definitely doesn't pay into the filmmaking techniques that it led into when it got to the violent portion. So I agree. I would agree with the 4-star review despite it as well too.
they didn't take away a whole bunch of stars. It just took away one.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All
Yeah.
right. We'll get into the second
It's
biggest
a decent one. I forgot there was a decent one in the midst of the.
Yeah, no, I like that one. I was you know what? Out of all the reviews we've read and out of the reviews that we're going to read next, that one was very well articulated, I think.
Yeah, well, they use a lot of our fancy words that we like to use.
Yeah, we don't know the meanings. Okay, here's another one. This one starts out pretty aggressive. It disappoints me that so many people adore this movie. Oh. I don't want to be discordant. Pardon me. I don't want to be a discordant opinion, especially because I stand in the total opposite camp. It's not as though as I simply didn't care for Parasite. I think it's a gross failure. I want to articulate what I have to say without coming off as condescending. This movie tricks its audience into believing what happens. The whole affair is false, contrived. People don't actually behave like this.
Ooh.
Okay.
Okay. Well, one thing about filmmaking is the whole point of films is that it's just something that didn't happen that you're trying to convince your
It's a
audience
bit, it's like life outside of the normal life. You know, films aren't meant to be, most films, there are a lot of realism films that are phenomenal, but a lot of films are meant for entertainment. They're meant to break the world that you live in a little bit so that they can tell a story, you know, like a good example, and I think we're going to get into one later, is Marvel films.
Right. Yeah. Not true. They feel realistic, but yeah, that makes sense.
People don't actually behave like this. Marvel films, you know, like do people behave normally in Marvel films? You know. Anyway, let's continue.
Well, can I say though, it's that in this film, I don't think there is like maybe that isn't that common for people to be con artists and stuff like that, but I don't think. Well, I know what it's gonna say next, so I'll just let you read that and then I'll finish my point.
I don't buy the argument that it's all a metaphor because it is, but metaphors need to evince. It's an interesting word I've never seen before. Metaphors need to evince an underlying human truth. Parasite reveals nothing except a shallow estimation that wealthy people are gullible and to be resented, while poor people are devious and to be pitied. I don't fully agree with this. I think you can metaphor almost anything despite a human truth being present or not, because I think a metaphor can reference any experience in life. You know, maybe director Bong Joon-Ho had this experience and he wanted to create this film as a metaphor for the experience that he went through, right? you know, I guess to just tie into the human truth line specifically, there's 7 billion humans
Yeah,
on this planet,
just
all
because
with their own truth, you know? So I think,
it's not relatable to you doesn't mean it's unrealistic.
no, exactly. And you know what? By all means, this reviewer is probably speaking from his own truth, which is fair and understandable. But I personally disagree with what he said.
I know maybe it wasn't this review. I thought it was, but one said that no one would ever be living in anyone's basement like that. I'm like, the first thing my first response
I
I
lived
said
in
to
my
you was,
mom's basement for quite a while, let
that
me
was
tell you. Sorry.
that was what I was gonna say. I mean that's Pete Davidson, but
Yeah.
there is such thing as squatters.
Yeah.
There's lots of times there's a house that has people hiding in it. I don't know. I don't think that, especially in a very poor ridden place, that is something that is that unbelievable. And that was another one, I guess. But they were like so heavily like there is never any, like I really don't believe it. But anyways, you may continue.
The rest of this is kind of just a little criticism of the director, which I don't think is necessary. Um, I do like the end line. That was a really good movie, we say, and then toddle home to scroll through our phones and nod off to sleep. Oh, I thought I remember reading one that ended like that, but it mentioned Fortnite. Anyway, let's move on to
We
another one.
read. Oh, it's so funny how many reviews you read that I'm mixing them all up right now.
Okay, this one's kind of a funny one. Half a star. Uh, barely talks about the film it's
Okay,
reviewing.
this is half a star.
Yeah.
So lowest rating you can give on Letterboxd.
I tried watching it on a plane trip and I got really bored. There was something about tutoring some Korean kid that likes dressing up like an Indian for some reason. I don't know. I put on Ford versus Ferrari instead. And I mean, wow. The Ford GT40 is such a cool car. I had so much trouble beating it in Gran Turismo 2 as a kid on classical Rome circuit. The AI actually rigs it by having that car exceed entry qualifications for horsepower. Anyway, America is still number one in motorsport and video games. I feel like this is a joke review.
Yeah, right. Like to totally be a joke review, but if that, oh my gosh, I when we first read that, it just got me so good.
That's funny.
It's just this has nothing to do with the movie. It was so ridiculous.
Could you imagine being the director of like an Oscar-winning film and
Yeah.
you decide one day, let's go to Letterboxd and read our reviews, and then that pops
I
up?
watched it on a plane. First off, oh,
Yeah.
can you imagine watching any movie on a plane? Of course, you're not gonna like it.
Oh man, I saw one movie on a plane once and I loved it. It was like it was a movie I've never seen before. I don't remember what it was though. I remember like when I love flying. This is a bit of a tangent. I love flying. When I get on a plane, I love to watch the clouds like out the window. This
Like the pretentious white man you are. So
that's getting cut.
Oh.
Next review. You dick. Next review.
Ruin that bit.
Let's get one thing straight. Parasite is phenomenal. It's a stunning, subtle, immensely powerful piece on class warfare and the nature of the human condition. It's also a tense, funny, extremely entertaining film that didn't feel its length at all. Go into it without knowing anything if you can. It made my viewing experience all the more exciting. But with that said, I didn't really like the ending. Tons of detail, character arcs, and storylines felt like they were dropped in an instant. And yeah, I know that was the point. But I'd be lying if I said the lack of resolution given to certain characters is something I'm happy about. Like for how well set up and intriguing Ki Jung's sociopathic tendencies are, that's what you do with her? I don't expect my disappointment with the ending to subside with time, but don't let that dissuade you from seeing this film. It's excellent, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. It's pretty much everything Jordan Peele's Us should have been. Interesting.
What?
Interesting.
I
Considering.
I don't remember that part of it. I skimmed through so many.
That's funny.
Um,
Let's not talk about that part because you know how we feel about
you know how
us.
we feel about us.
I agree. I mean, this is very much I agree. This is very much a similar comment to the first one we read.
I will agree that maybe Ki Jung was wasted. Her death was wasted. She was just stabbed.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, But I think I'm trying to think like if it was anyone else, like would I guess they probably would, but I was gonna say would everyone else respond like that? Like the reason it like it being her got them like got the response. Like if it was just like if it was Miss Kim or Miss Kim, not Miss Kim, Miss Park, they wouldn't have gone running up to her. Um, but it would have to have been one of the family members. But yeah, it was quite anticlimactic. But I don't think overall the arcs were dropped because I think this well that's pretty much where most of the arcs kind of were wrapped up with um you know
I
Key Tech kind of
can I jump in on that? I think it was necessary for her to die there because all of the arcs aside from hers needed to be wrapped up. You know, the dad, Kitek, that was like the thing, right? Like you mentioned
it
earlier.
was the thing that broke him.
It was Mr. Park caring more about his son who fainted over the woman who was just stabbed, right? Now he is unknowing that it was Kitek's daughter,
Right.
but that was
Nonetheless.
that was the little like check mark on the box for Mr. Kim that really pushed him over the edge. It's like this guy really doesn't care about this woman who was just stabbed at his own son's birthday party, who's helped his son through all this stuff, right? And the art tutoring, all that jazz. So I think it was very necessary for her to go out that way. Unfortunate because she was such a great character and she deserved a better end to it.
I kind of do agree though that maybe I don't think this person was saying that, but maybe the women in this film didn't have that much arcs. Like Miss Kim and then Ki Jung didn't really have much arc. Also, that was a bit missed opportunity because I maybe it's something I didn't notice. I'm not saying dismissing that they didn't have one because I just noticed the Rock and
Yeah,
um
those are definitely the heavy hitters
the
of the
smoke,
whole movie, right?
but
But
maybe missed opportunity there.
we got one more review here. 1/2 star.
Ooh.
I can't believe I ever liked this movie. What was I thinking? Overacted, lack of diversity in the cast, and there were no standout performances. The plot
Sorry.
jumps all over the place from one genre to the next, and there are so many plot holes. Sorry, there are so many plot holes?
Is there a question mark at the
Yeah.
end of that?
Would anyone ever really be living under someone's house?
Ah, there it is.
That's just blatantly unrealistic. It preaches these themes of class struggles and self worth, but is just an overinflated ego boost for Bong Joon-Ho. Not looking forward to whatever projects anyone involved with this movie has next. A hard 1/2 star for Paradise. That's a brutal review. Brutal
I'd like
review.
to hear the plot holes that they had, because even like the, I don't know, we didn't
Even
even
I
pick,
didn't
yeah.
catch many plot holes. There's like one or two small
Unless
things.
it's just the like the unrealistic. They don't know what squatters are.
Yeah,
Point. Uh,
that was brutal.
that was
I
brutal.
don't
I
agree.
also I love the diversity of the.
Yeah,
There's no diversity in the cast. You're watching a foreign film
shot in
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 Korea.
Korea, and you want people who aren't Korean. I mean, I understand diversity in a Western audience, in a Western film, is important nowadays.
There was a German family in the movie.
It
Anyway, sorry. I just think that's a little silly.
is, I
In
think.
a diverse movie, it is. Anyways, whatever.
Not to rip into this reviewer
No,
because they're definitely entitled to what they feel,
we're reading reviews. That's yeah.
but I disagree. I think the acting. Let's break it down into the actual filmmaking categories. The acting was phenomenal. I think the acting was very well done. Um,
Very very subtle performances
yeah,
that kind of went unmissed. That's most things with film is you, unless you don't want to notice it, because if you don't notice it, it's good. If you notice it, it's usually not good.
and this film specifically is very theatrical. It is very over the top. So even in an essence, an overact in this world, I think is appropriate because it fits the entire story that exists within this world that Bong Joon-ho's created.
It
Um,
gives it that extra punch, like when someone faints rather than like goes ah, just faints. I think it adds to the theatricalness of the story.
yeah, it plays its part very well. Plot jumps. Next point, the plot jumps all over from one genre to the next. I disagree.
I think it's like maybe the action at the end is goes full thriller, but
Yeah,
I think it stays pretty thriller, pretty drama the whole time.
yeah. It's it's a drama with comedy thrown in. Um, and it's also not unfitting comedy. It's
Usually, comedies used in thrillers to relieve the tension. We talked about that in Us for sure.
yeah. Comedy
But
is comedy and comedy and tension go hand in hand, right? You shouldn't have one without the other, in my opinion. A good thriller has funny moments. Anyway, folks, that was just a little quick review of the negative reviews we found for Parasite.
the mixed reviews.
Yeah, the mixed reviews. I
That
think that's you know what? I think that's a very good part of the show. Is
is well, seeing reviews and not just talking about the filmmaker's aspect, but the audience aspect.
Yeah, I think it
Really,
fits well.
I can't say I watch movies the same
I
since I've
don't
learned
either.
filmmaking, but
I've definitely learned that this is a challenge for me to do. And to remain cuz I have to remain um unbiased, but I have to be biased
right.
to remain unbiased because I'm looking for bad things. So I can't just look at things I don't like. I have to remain unbiased in what everyone wouldn't like. So it's a fun little moment of realization about filmmaking, and I think it's making me a better filmmaker because it's keeping my eyes peeled for things that I would change in my own filmmaking.
I think that's a good place to wrap up.
I think so too. Overall, what would you call Parasite? Would it be mixed reviews? What would you call a mixed reviews review of Parasite here?
I think it's a very good movie. I think it's on my list of favorites. I don't have a favorite. I have a very big list of favorites because all my favorites are so drastically different. I love them for so many reasons. This movie for its storytelling, its visual storytelling, I think it's up there.
I remember when we wanted to get you to watch it, and you were a little hesitant.
Well, I was hesitant because the subtitles, and I was worried I was gonna miss so much.
And I remember convincing you to watch it and give it a shot, and you ended up taking it to the hills. You loved it so
And then
much.
I went and bought the movie too and everything. I loved it so much.
So I'm glad we were able to have that moment with each other.
That's one we didn't watch a lot of movies together at that time, but it's kind of funny that full circle. This is one of the movies we first watched together, and then here we are.
Yeah,
All right.
reviewing.
Thanks, Tom, for joining.
Thank you for having me
I
again
don't know why I said that.
in the 50-50 podcast that I also help with.
I don't know what. Anyways,
Thank you to the viewer
for joining us.
for hanging out and listening to us talk about one of our favorite movies.
Be sure to subscribe to the Patreon and hear the long version with lots more tangents
And more
deep
rambling
dives.
and
I think we get a little educational when the stuff we kind of take out is usually educational stuff
yeah.
about film.
Yeah,
So-
you'd get the Patreon if you want to learn little insights to how filmmaking works, right? So if that's something you're interested in, definitely check it out. Patreon is a wonderful thing. It helps us create content for you guys, so we can get better, higher quality, more education out to the people who want it.
We can build a little set in the corner of our apartment for us to record a podcast.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right.
Thanks for coming.
Adios.
Adios.
Nap time.
Mixed reviews.